Hey, welcome to 10 Days of BYO Love. That's Bring Your Own Love. You know, self-love is one of the most powerful loves you can experience because it creates the most wonderful foundation to base and understand who you are. Okay, because love, yes, is one of our true essences. It's our very birthright. And you know what happens is that it's usually all of our conditioning that and everything that we pick up along the way that tends to disrupt this connection that we have with our own love. Okay, so today is day 2 and of 10 days of BYO Love. And today I want to talk to you about how to adopt beautiful soft eyes for you. Okay, because when we adopt soft eyes, we adopt a more open-hearted and compassionate approach to ourselves and also the people around us. Okay, so just the very term soft eyes moves you into a space of softness. Okay, and what happens is that we are usually the hardest on ourselves. Our self-judgment, which is going to be a day and a topic in itself, can often be very harsh, and so we need a trigger or a talisman that can help us flick the switch to go from being harsh and hard on ourselves, because we often have very high standards. And for those of you that are perfectionists, I've certainly been there and I'm guilty. It's really important to be able to master or flick this switch so that you can move into soft eyes for you. Because when you have soft eyes for you, then you'll that helps you soften your internal environment, and it actually means that you'll have softer eyes and more compassion and openness and understanding, not just for you but for everyone else around you. And guess what? That helps us create a more harmonious family life, relationship with our partners, working environment with our workmates, community all around. Even just the fact that when you have soft eyes for you and you're not in critical mode or in a critic mode, then you tend to be more open and welcoming. And even the person that you might be buying your train or bus ticket from, or the shopkeeper that you are talking to, will receive a softer, warmer, more loving version of you, which is true you. So I think today adopting soft eyes is a really important lesson, technique, and access to true you that we should all move heaven and earth to perfect. So, okay, so how do we adopt soft eyes? Okay, what does that look like? Well, it's kind of the opposite to judgment. You know, judgment can be very hard, very linear, and very defensive, deflective, but it's hard. It comes across as hard and harsh. Okay, so adopting soft eyes, it's a bit like, actually, I like to often use yoga approaches, but it's a bit like when you are in a yoga pose and you lower your eyes and you soften your gaze. Okay, we're not so intense. Okay, so when we adopt soft eyes for ourselves and each other, we're actually dropping our intensity levels. And so there is more of a rounded, and as I keep saying the word soft edge. Okay, and that doesn't, soft, I just want to pause right here, right now. Soft doesn't mean weak. And I must admit, I was guilty of that. Once upon a time, I thought things like love, particularly self-love, and coming from a space of love and softness were linked to weakness, right? So I always thought that to be a strong, independent woman or man, that you needed firmness and you needed directness, and you needed sharpness. It's kind of funny. I'm actually writing a leadership book at the moment called I Used to Be a Machete, Now I'm a Scalpel. And a scalpel is a precision tool that the professionals, professional doctors use. Because sometimes when we do personal growth, personal and professional growth and development, we do need to cut away layers, okay? But needless to say, we don't need to be a machete carving a path through our own inner landscape or the landscape where others live, at family, at work, at the shopping centre, in the traffic queue. We don't need that sort of approach, okay? So getting back to soft our eyes, how do we do that? So part of it is softening our gaze. And, because what happens is that we can, if you are struggling to make a change in your mood or the way you feel, then what we can use is we can use our physiology, our physical bodies, to send signals to our nervous system and our emotional system to relax. Hey, there's no threat. It's time to relax. And so one of the ways you can actually do that, the quickest way you can do that, is to smile to yourself. Now, why don't you just stop and, as you're listening to me right now, smile to yourself, hey? And after the video, why don't you go and smile at yourself in the mirror? But when you smile at yourself, you soften. It's incredible. It is the most amazing thing. One of the first things I always do in the morning when I'm waking and I'm first in that theta state in the morning is I say to myself, I love you, Jenny, and I smile. I also tell myself, I love you, Jenny, before I go to bed as well, and I smile. So I like to start and finish my day that way. And the act of smiling at yourself has the most amazing impact. Now, maybe, just maybe, you're someone like I was when I first left corporate. And you know what? I lost my dimples, my childhood, I lost my childhood dimples when I was at corporate. And they have come back because when I was in corporate, it was back in the 80s. And working in a man's world, you kind of had to play, you had to adopt the male energy. Well, maybe you didn't have to, but I did, okay? And so you kind of played the game that the guys played. And that was, to take a firm, hard self and to be very serious. I started my life as a chartered accountant for Pricewaterhouse. And so, there was a lot of responsibility and there was a lot of seriousness. I thought to be a professional person, I had to be serious. And so over the time that I worked in corporate, I actually, even though I still had a very playful essence to myself, I found that I lost the ability to smile. So when I first left corporate, I realized that smiling didn't feel comfortable on my face. Right? So I had to do limbering exercises to actually change and be okay to wear a smile. Now it's kind of funny. It's the opposite. Now, if I have a gruff or, sort of a flat face, it feels really unusual. And it doesn't seem to fit. Whereas the opposite was the case before. So maybe you need to limber up your smile muscles, and that is just like any other muscle. You just got to practice. Practice makes permanent. So very easy way to trigger yourself into a softer state is to, lower your gaze and bring your gaze forward and down and to smile at yourself, okay? Smile at yourself. And, and just feel that love in your heart, okay? Now, if that's still difficult and you're having problems feeling a softening, then what you can do is you can I look at like little Jen, who was somewhere between 5 and maybe 10. And I think to myself, what would little Jen want, right? I know little Jen often got a whack over the bum because you're allowed to smack back in those days. And, I was brought up in a house full of discipline as opposed to, we had what I call tough love, but I actually realized that it wasn't love at all. It was just definitely discipline, but it was very conditional love. And we're going to talk about unconditional love. That's got a whole day to itself too, because it's a very important aspect. So, when you talk to little Jen or little Dave or little Bob or little Loretta or little Andy or little Kim or little Ali or little Gay or little whoever, you adopt the language and the softness with which you would speak to a child, okay? And, often that's what we just actually want. Sometimes we just want to be held, and maybe you want to give yourself a physical hug, or maybe you go to a significant other or a best friend or whatever, and you actually get a physical hug. But it's really easy to flick the switch to moving into soft eyes. You embrace that inner child, and you think about, what would I have liked back at that age? Right? Whether you got it or not, what would you like? If you were this age now, what would you like? And it's usually a big hug, and it's usually compassion, and it's usually understanding, and it's usually softness and reassuring that everything will be okay because you'll find a way. Things unfold, don't they, if we let them and allow them and give them space. So that's my second tip. So it's about smiling, and then it's about, speaking the words that you would use with the younger version of you, a little version of you, okay? Now, the other thing I wanted, give you a suggestion around is more of a psychological and intellectual reframing, okay? And so because we're often really hard on ourselves, and one of the reasons why we are is because of the way we define ourselves, okay? And we tend to define ourselves by what I call the be, do, have model. What we have is if you think about a big circle, right? The outer circle is what we have. Draw a circle within that, and the inner circle is what we do. And then draw a little bullseye in the middle of that, and that's who we be. Now, when we define ourselves heavily by what we have and what we do, which is the natural progression as we grow up, if you think about a child and you take a toy away from them, and it could be a rock or a stick or a leaf or a caterpillar or something, or a pet or a toy. I think I said that, but anyway, if you take something away from them, then they can often have a hissy fit, and they start screaming and, don't take that away. And that's not necessarily from them being undisciplined or whatever, but it's the attachment. Because when we're in our early years, everything that we have is an extension of us, right? It's how we identify us. Where as babies, we're just learning that we have fingers and, toes that we can stick into our mouths. And, we use all of our senses to work out who and what we are by what we have, okay? And so that's our first level of self-definition. Our second level of self-definition is what we do. And as we kind of leave school, we move more into that phase, into high school. What are you going to study? It's all about what are you going to do with your life? So much pressure, hey? And then that starts the really big doing. I mean, it does start at school too, because, are you a teacher's pet? Are you a rebel? Are you are you a hard worker? Are you a slack ass? There's all sorts of labels that start coming in. Are you a good girl? Are you a naughty boy? Or a good boy and a naughty girl? All these labels around our doing definition starts coming into play. So then we start to define ourselves by what we do, okay? And so if I think back to my corporate years, when I look at, I totally define myself on my do's and on my doing and my having. I was a corporate executive. I drove a really nice car. I had a parking space and a smart title. I had a beautiful house by the beach. I had a loving partner. I was an executive. I was a director. you know? And so, you know, I had a big pace packet. And so that was how I defined myself. And it wasn't until I actually left corporate that I realized, well, actually leaving corporate, the reason why I left corporate is because the B part of me, the very core of me, woke me up because it was hollow, because there had to be more than just the doing and the having. You know, look at elite sportists. Look at all those Olympic sports people, or elite sports people in baseball, football, soccer, or tennis. How many of them, or swimmers, you know, how many of them go into a deep depression? What about people? You must know people, and maybe even your experience. Yes, you do know people, but you must know people that maybe have finished a big corporate career, or maybe have been let go from their job, and they fall into this depression, and this they get lost because their whole sense of identity was defined about what they did and what they had. You know, they had titles or they had a position, and we attach value around ourselves to those particular things, right? But there is that big part, the be. That's the essence of who we be, right? We are human beings. We're not human doings. But we tend to get caught up in this whole doingness. In fact, I think one of the big addictions that humanity has, particularly the Western world, Anglo-Saxons, is our addiction to busyness, right? Because when we're doing and when we're having and accumulating, we don't have to focus on who we be. And you know what? That requires a little bit of courage and maybe a little bit of confrontation, because in reality, we probably are, there's parts of us that are not the true part of us. You know, there's our authentic self and our false selves. And again, we're going to talk about that a little bit more. So it's really important. It's really important to understand that when we define ourselves so heavily by what we have and what we do, we come up with a more rigid view of ourselves. And so when that gets confronted, or when people maybe don't agree with what we do, and that could be voting for a party, or it could be choosing to get vaccinated or not, we can see all this decisiveness happening and separation happening, even in families and lifelong friends, around how people are acting and what they are doing, and you know what beliefs they have. And this is getting us into a sticky space, right? And what happens is we move into a lot of judgment and self-judgment, and we don't adopt soft eyes, right? Because we are evaluating each other, honor each other's identity and value based on just the having and the doing. We're forgetting about the being, the essence of the person. Remember, we are human beings. So one of the things, a really powerful reframe, and you know, I have taken a moment to get to this point, but it was important to explain this way of how we identify ourselves. And it really is an important aspect, but that's for another conversation on another topic. I will go more deeply into that, but I wanted to give you a flavour because it affects deeply how we define ourselves and the levels to which we evaluate ourselves. So I'm going to give you a really powerful reframe, and it's all around the word nothing, okay? The word nothing. Like, I used to have a really big judgment on myself. I am all or I'm nothing. And so, you know, and it was kind of like I am flow and I'm ebb, or ebb and flow. And that's kind of interesting because we judge ourselves harshly, and yet ebb and flow is so natural. You know, it's quantum physics. It's balance. If you have an ebb, you have to have a flow. If you have a flow, you have to have an ebb, right? So anyway, to get to this actual point is that nothing, the word nothing, is made of two words, right? So when I had the judgment of I am all or nothing, I only focused on the word, the definitional word nothing. But now I take a totally different approach to it. I have reframed it in that it is made up of two words, no thing, okay? I am no one thing. right? I have a big range. I'm everything. I really am. If you take an open look at yourself, step outside the narrower view that you have of yourself, and you see the extensive range that you are, when you understand that you are no one thing, then you are more likely to love and embrace and have soft eyes for all of you, right? Because here's the thing. You might think yourself as like it would be great. It would be a good idea for you to write down how, how you view some of the things. What are some of the words that you like to identify or describe yourself with? Okay, so for me, it would be open-hearted, loving, courageous, playful, joy-filled, provocative. I like to poke. I like particularly poke people. I like to wake people up. And yeah, free-spirited, free, right? But here's the thing. Let me just take freedom for a moment. You know, freedom has so many different flavors. My flavor is the free-spirited aspect. Other people's flavor might be financial freedom. It could be freedom in terms of time and space. There's a huge amount of flavors of freedom. And again, that's probably another conversation in itself as well. What flavor of freedom are you? You know, if you want to take a moment, drop down below in the comments below, what flavor of freedom are you? I'd love to know. But let's just take freedom, for example. Now, I'm free-spirited and I'm a nomad. So I am free from societal norms. I live outside the matrix. And so I can identify all the areas that I am free. But I also am contained, and because I am nothing, I am no one thing. I like to attach, or I like to see, or I like to live my life from a space of freedom. And so I am always aspiring to free myself up more and more and more. And that's why unconditionality is so important to me, because living and loving conditionally actually, is the opposite to freedom. It's containment. But I am still contained. I still have limiting beliefs. I still limit myself by, in terms of my abilities. Yes, I have a big range, but the potential for my range is even huger. Huger? Is that the right word? But so can you see what I mean? Now, because I'm less attached to the fact that I am a free spirit and freedom and free from, particularly free from mind, I'm also, and because I buy into the whole reframe around I am no one thing, I am not as attached, is probably a good word, to the words that define me. I know that where my containment is. And I'm sure I have blind spots where I have other containments. And that's where my inner circle of friends are very powerful, and they all have permission to show me the light of where I have blind spots, okay? So have a think about, go back to the few words that you jotted down about how you define yourself. Find the opposite of them and go, okay, where do people perceive me that way? Where can I see I am that way? And when you start to realize that you are everything, you're no one thing, you're nothing, then the attachments drop away. And so guess what? You're in a better position to be able to love all of you, okay? Because we have lots of disowned parts. If I think about my own self, I had a lot of disowned parts, behaviourally. I was an alcoholic at 30. And so during those alcoholic years, I had some pretty shameful events. And I really struggled to love myself. And, that was part of the problem. I hated myself at that stage. And so having a healthy sense of self-love actually helps you address your wounding. And soft eyes is a really important part of that. And one of the things, I suppose, that hating myself actually helped me do is it helped me to love myself unconditionally. Because I thought, well, if I can love myself with all of those blemishes, then that's moving me towards unconditional love. Now, some of you might have parts of you that you don't love, and there might be physical parts. There might be your bum, although big bums are getting back in trend now, particularly here in Latin America. Or you might not like your thighs, or you might think that you have ugly feet. I last year had a really big challenge, as a lot of women do when they're in their 50s, and particularly their late 50s. You start to notice the aging. And so, I started not to like my neck, the grey hairs, which I've since embraced. I embrace my inner crone now, but I have reframed that, because the inner crone is a powerful woman. Back in the ancient days, she was the holder of wisdom. And I like that. I like that idea, to be one of the elders that hold wisdom. I think that's a very honoured and privileged way. And you know what a friend of mine said to me, a very dear friend of mine, Ali said to me, she said, aging is a gift. Many people don't get to experience it. And in that one moment when that was said to me, that just woke me up, and I adopted soft eyes to all my aging aspects. And do you know what? The other thing that I've come to realise and come to terms with last week, it was a big aha for me, is that my inner landscape over the last 2 decades has softened immensely. As I said, I used to be a machete at work. And sometimes people would just cry when I walked into the room, which is that's not a nice thing to create within someone. That's a lot of fear, isn't it? It's not very nice. So anyway, as I've softened my inner landscape, my outer landscape is softening as well. And so, yes, I used to be a kickboxer and amateur. I used to train in a kickboxing and boxing gym. And so I was very toned and all muscular and very little fat. And now I've softened a lot more. But I'm embracing that new softness because it is a reflection of my inner landscape. Now, that's not to say that I'm going to do a little toning and get a little bit more firmness back in there. It's about being all things, isn't it? No one thing. All right, so I've chatted away for 27 minutes now. I'd love to know what resonates and lands for you. Which of those things do you think you can engage? Or maybe you're engaging them already. Maybe you have some other things. Do you like the concept of soft eyes? I do. So remember to smile at yourself. Remember to tell yourself that you love you. And, if you're having difficulty finding empathy for you and dropping down the level of judgment or critical nature that you have of yourself and of others, then, ask yourself, what would the little version of you like to hear right now from you? And then just remember that powerful reframe. We are all or nothing. When we realise that we are no one thing, that we are everything, then people can point the finger at us, whatever, and you can point your own finger at you, because you have it all. And so that takes away the defensiveness, it lessens the power and impact of judgment, right? And it helps you to love all the parts of you, okay? Because they are what make you unique. All right, that's it from me. Love to you. Big hugs. Love you dearly. Thanks for tuning in.